Hey, I'm Jess.
And I'm Ryan, and you're listening to Your Therapist is Not Okay.
Today's episode is another question that we had from somebody. This one comes from YouTube. Their main question was, who are we inside versus outside the therapy room? Are we different from who we are as therapists to who we are as friends, partners, etc. in the outside world?
We just want to thank you for all the comments, the questions, the likes, reviews, follows, and thank you for those of you who have subscribed. We just love getting your feedback. We're glad that this podcast is growing and reaching more people. Please keep it coming. Interact with our content, click the subscribe button, let us beat the algorithm, and help make a difference against the stigma of mental health.
So, thinking about this question, Ryan, you and I have actually talked about this a lot of like who we are, like as therapists, and then what happens as we leave. And one of the things you and I have often talked about is that in a lot of times, it almost feels like who we are as therapists is just offering ourselves to clients. And so, how do we shut that off necessarily in a day to day kind of relating with people outside of the therapy room?
Hmm. Absolutely. And I guess I kind of want to maybe push to think like I think I agree absolutely with you. And at the same time, I think there's got to be some differences between the way that we show up somehow. Do you feel there are any differences between therapist Jess and everyday Jess?
I think so. Yeah, like there's often times when someone's coming to me with problems, like a dear friend of mine.
Mm.
Um, it's not uncommon for them to say, "Oh, Jess, I'm so sorry, you're not at work right now." And for me to kind of be like, "What? Like you're my friend. Of course I want to hear about what's going on in your life. I'm off the clock. I don't think that I'm working right now." Um, and then it kind of I usually then have to give a spiel to my friends, or my family that you can bring anything to me. And the way I'm going to listen will be very different than how I listen as a therapist. So I think I could probably break that down for you, Ryan. Um,
Mm.
like when I'm listening to a client, I'm usually listening for themes. I'm thinking about what did they say 3 weeks, 3 months ago about this topic? What are consistent words that are being used, which is usually grist for the mill as a psychodynamic practitioner. If someone keeps saying the word, let's say betrayed, I'm going to really like the first time might be just that's how they're describing something. The second time is like, wait, this becomes kind of a bit of a theme. And if there's like a third time, it's like betrayal is now the theme of this session. Like something's happening here. Oftentimes when we're talking, we have no recollection of what we're saying. It's why actually repeating words back to a client sometimes feel quite profound. Because when we're describing how we're feeling, we're not necessarily listening to ourselves as we're describing it. So having that reflected back can be incredibly changing in like how we're viewing our own narrative. I'm not going to do that to a friend.
No, that would be very awkward.
I'm not gonna be like 3 months ago we were really processing this with your partner. Like I'm not gonna necessarily be grabbing onto things.
I don't know, Jess. I feel like you said that to me.
Okay, maybe I have said it to you, but like you're also a therapist. I know anyone that's like listening to this that's actually close in my life be like, Jess. Uh,
So, like, yeah, I think there is kind of maybe sometimes that muddying of the waters. Like, we have been professionally trained to like listen and make connections and do those things. And
mm,
I think I'm with you in that I'm mostly successful in like kind of turning that off because it takes a different amount and type of energy. And it means that I'm not being a friend, like
mm,
in a very selfish way of like this is suddenly a relationship if I'm being a therapist where I have responsibility
mm,
and it can't be about me. And
yeah.
so if I'm having a friendship, it has to be somewhat about me. There has to be this mutuality. So I think one thing, and I know I'm teasing about this a little bit, but like there is also like our mutuality to like playing with therapeutic terms and supporting each other in that way, probably because we're both therapists. And so it still feels like it's mutual, not that one of us is the other's therapist.
I think what you're saying is actually perfect. You're right. We are buddies. We do use like jargon with each other. Um, I think also there's this aspect of power you're talking about. Like
Hmm.
we know what kind of questions to ask those in our lives to kind of go deeper. And I think it is a choice not to go there. Um, if one of like if someone I'm really close to is talking about something that I realize there could be a link with childhood or something like something very normal I would lean in with a client to, I won't do that with somebody that's coming to me for advice. And it's exactly that, Ryan. It's because that's not what they're coming for. They're not coming for therapy. They're coming for a buddy. And I'll give advice. Like one thing my friends and like my family probably get that maybe other people wouldn't have in a relationship without like outside of the therapy role is I'm a good listener, you know? Like I think we
Mhm.
are trained in our doctorates to like figure out how to listen really well. So usually probably if we are reflecting back with our like with our people in the outside space, like we're probably are engaging much more intuitively because I remember how hard it was to have to unlearn everything I knew before to like
Mm.
relearn how to listen. That was
Yeah,
hard.
absolutely. I think what you're saying is really insightful too, because as you kind of described that, and like I have that moment all the time when
Mm,
I'm talking to someone, I'm like, oh, there it is. Like that's the path to depth. And I'm going
yes.
to not ask that question because
Yeah.
that's gonna open up a whole thing that I don't know if this friend or acquaintance or family member wants to be that exposed. And we don't have the boundaries set up that are so essential to therapy that so that they and I can both feel safe and they and I can also know this is contained within this set period of time for you to be vulnerable and held.
Yes.
And without those boundaries, it's not necessarily therapeutic to push someone to death.
Yeah.
Whereas when I think about some friends I have, including you, we have kind of like this mutual agreement that like, we like going to depth together and
Yeah.
we're okay in doing that.
Mm,
Um, and okay at, if not excellent at caring for ourselves so
mm.
that, you can push me to the depth and I'm okay.
Oh, I love when I do and you're like, thank you. I won't be taking that advice.
I don't take anyone's advice and I don't ever ask anyone for advice.
I feel like I'll say something to you very profound, right? And you'll be like, yes, you're absolutely right. I will not be listening to that.
Absolutely not. I'm not looking for healing right now.
One thing that I noticed when I was doing my doctorate, because my doctorate was all about how the body comes into every space and how the body has a number of messages that are placed on it. Every single body, in my opinion, does. As soon as you walk into a room, your body says something about you. But we don't talk about it that much, and that was my doctorate. And I was interviewing a number of women identifying therapists for my doctorate to kind of think about how do the outside motifs of woman come into the therapy room
Hmm.
and do they? And a lot of the participants talked about dress code and presenting as woman. And I really resonated with that, even as researcher. So it was a focus group that really allowed them to kind of like lead the research. And they were talking about going out for lunch and wearing like a really floral dress, but going home to change to look more quote unquote professional um, before seeing clients. And I really resonated with this theme. And I noticed for myself outside the room, I sometimes will bump into a client and I might be wearing something quite different than what I might be wearing in the therapy office. Um, and starting to realize that that was a resonating theme with a lot of therapists is something I think I wanted to bring up just now that I might wear short shorts and like a tank top in the summer when I'm going out to the beach with you.
Mhm.
And And it can be really odd sometimes when you see a client that's seeing you very kind of casually dressed when your job is to kind of hold space and be this person that is going to care for a client. It can kind of disrupt that space in some ways, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that what we wear is a significant part of that, which has some similarities in any profession. But I'm hearing what you're saying about like, kind of trying to self-monitor for looking professional, which as a therapist, and from what I've heard from you too, especially as a woman, has a lot to do with will I be taken seriously?
Mhm.
Will my client be comfortable? Will I or they be distracted in some way? So I think, and I definitely have noticed myself also like wanting to present a certain level of this kind of like mix of laid back and professional, right?
Yeah.
I want
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
look comfortable and inviting,
Hmm.
um, like I'm an easy to talk to kind of person,
Mm,
and I also don't want to look like a slob. Right. So,
yeah.
and there's a lot of self-monitoring for that, even with just maybe the way my hair is falling at a moment or the way my face is moving on a certain day that really shows up with online therapy because I can see myself, which
Hmm.
is a blessing and a curse, right? Like I would often have to turn off my self view because like I want to be looking at the client, not myself. And then there are other times when it's helped me be able to clock like your forehead is like really working overtime, overreacting to this client. So I could be like, sometimes they say, smooth it out, Ryan.
Smooth it out.
Smooth it out. So yeah, there's that professional and unprofessional. And as soon as you started talking about this, I was immediately thinking about that kind of situation that I've had, especially living in Edinburgh because we say it's a village.
Hmm.
Everyone walks everywhere. You run into people all the time. It's a place where you will probably run into clients,
Hmm.
which is a little less likely in some bigger cities like Toronto, and it still happens. And I think about this time when I was walking down a busy street, and a client saw me, and I was wearing a tank top and like shorts, like clearly on my way to the beach. And it was a very different me that they saw. It makes me
Mm.
think of this teacher I had in high school who would laugh because he thought everyone was surprised if they saw him in the grocery store in the summer that he had legs, that his students would be like, "Oh, you have legs. You're wearing shorts." There's some amount of just being covered up and looking professional, and that has connotations in different cultures, but everywhere that I've worked, that's gonna typically mean like not shorts, not a tank top. There's not really any professional outfit option for masculine presenting people that involves sleeveless.
Well, interestingly enough, and we don't have to get into this too much, but when I was looking into this research, I was interested in what professional looked like. And I was
Mm.
interested in what neutral looked like, because that came up a lot in my research. And when I started researching this and looking into it, there's a lot of articles that talk about professional and neutral as masculine.
Mm.
Like very buttoned down, like usually like looking very particularly masculine in certain senses, like not wearing florals, not looking overtly feminine. It was important research that had been done, but it was really made me realize that neutral is not neutral. And I think
Mm.
you're speaking to that right now.
Absolutely. And I'm actually kind of interested reflecting while you're speaking because while I would typically cover up, I'm not probably going to wear clothes with like big logos. I'm not likely to come to work in like a pride kind of
Mm,
shirt, even if it's just a t-shirt or something like that, because I tend to shy away from like really overt political messages because I want
mhm.
to be a therapist that can help anyone process things.
Yeah.
But it's particularly important for me to be there for queer folks and folks who've experienced or are experiencing oppression too. So there's still a politicality to that work. But anyway, I do wear florals. I
Mhm.
do wear bright colors. There's some element of I want my clients to know that I'm queer. I don't want it to
Mhm.
be about that in the therapy, but a lot of my clients, that's a signal for safety. That's a signal for this is not such a masculine person that I might be under threat.
Okay.
So it's a button down shirt, but it's a muted floral pattern. It's one of my favorite work shirts.
I know that shirt well. I'm curious, Ryan, about because you're talking about not necessarily wanting to look overtly political or not trying to kind of sway clients, allowing people to feel safe, but at the same time wanting them to kind of have a piece of you, of who
Hmm.
you are, of your personality. It kind of makes me think about, is there a therapist persona that you have? And what, if anything, do you change in that persona or for that persona when you see clients?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I think as just a big part of the practice of not taking up the room, I'm
Mm,
not going to react to things quite as largely as I might on this podcast or as friends. You have called me a Nathan Lane before. I can
wow.
have a sense of melodrama about me. Um, but I feel that takes the, kind of the focus off of the client if I were to do that in the room. So there'll be like maybe moments where a client might get a hint of that because it's about, it's a way to like gently challenge them, or it's a way to join in understanding the intensity of the thing that they experience, to be like, oh, we are so affronted that that person would say that thing to you or something. So it can be a way to like build that alliance. But typically, yeah, I'm going to show up a little bit more even keel as a
Mm,
therapist. Like it's gonna be a very calm, very neutral. Part of what I'm doing with that intentionally is offering a little bit of co-regulation. I'm keeping my nervous system regulated and calm so that that can also be something for the client to see, witness, experience, and also feel a little bit calmer so that we can talk about the really heavy and difficult stuff in that kind of grounded sense as much as is tolerable.
mm,
And I do, yeah, there is the sense that I want my queerness to be there a little bit. And I don't, there's part of me, and that part of that is probably just some shadow stuff too. That's just me,
mm,
of like, I want to have painted nails. I want to be wearing an earring. If I start a session or a consultation with someone and I'm not wearing an earring, like I'm right now noticing I'm not wearing an earring, I don't like that. The earring just kind of, it's a little hint at the personality that I'm muting a little bit. So like you
okay.
get my whole personality, you get me, but you're gonna get like a slightly muted, the pastel tones of Ryan, so to speak. But this kind of like splash of color or playfulness also lets you know, but like it's okay. Like we don't have to be like so serious in here that we don't play, because play is really important for therapy too. And so is this feeling of like this is a real and normal person,
Mm,
not a kind of someone who's neutral and clinical. That now some people might try to take that kind of quote neutral, like as you're saying, it's not necessarily neutral, and I hear you and agree with you on that.
mhm,
But I don't give that kind of clinical sense. And while some therapists may prefer to do that, I don't.
mm,
So that I don't know if I fully kind of answered that persona question, but I think like there is a little bit of a different Ryan. It's still the same personality kind of driving it underneath. It's maybe a different form of energy that I'm bringing. And I do try to call upon the parts of myself that are holding and thoughtful. I try to be in, actually, the DBT term that I would use is wise mind. I try to be in that space where I can consider feelings and cognitions and think about like what would be a healthy and mature way to navigate, to notice, to recognize. Whereas in day-to-day life, maybe in a friend situation, I'm going to decline to always do that, right? Just like you were saying, when like you might give me some really sage, balanced advice as a friend, and I'm gonna say, no, I've decided to spiral about this, and I will not take that advice. So that's me choosing, like, I'm not gonna bring, maybe in some way, my highest self to this moment.
mm,
Whereas as a therapist, I do try to bring and be in that wise mind, that kind of highest self. Um, yeah.
mm. As you're talking about that, I was thinking about, I think you bring in safety through closing, through showing yourself. You're showing clients that bringing all of you is safe here by bringing in a lot of pieces of you, even the earring, that there's a sense of almost nakedness when you don't have your
Mhm.
earring on. That part of you is missing. Um, and for that, clients can immediately look at you and think they know who they are. Even if there's parts of you maybe outside the therapy room that's still kind of processing and is real, obviously. For a client, they can kind of look at you and see that you've done some work on yourself to know who you are and who you will present to people. And that
Mm.
sounds like it feels like it's just right there. And I thought I started thinking about myself. I would say I'm more well, I actually don't really dress that flamboyantly anyway. Looking at myself right now with my brown turtleneck. I'm like, ooh,
Is that a shade of beige?
thank you. Um, but my personality is pretty similar, actually. And I was going to say that before when you were asking me, is there a therapist Jess and an everyday Jess? And I think one of the things that I've said yes to is kind of like maybe about like the kind of advice I give or how I listen, maybe how I might dress from like if I'm going somewhere specific with friends to being a therapist. But when I think about my personality, like the weird jokes I make or laughing, I know that in my personality, it's not uncommon for me to go somewhere pretty like fun and maybe have some levity into the depths and stay there. And I'll do that with friends, I'll do that with clients. And so I was thinking about how I think clients get a lot of my personality. Like what anyone's listening to
Mm.
on this podcast, they're probably going to see in the therapy room. There's not really a divide about um how I treat friends versus clients actually at
Mm.
all. The kind of content and like the relationship's different, but how I see them, view them, talk to them, not different at all, I don't think.
Mm. It does feel to me like this is a vocation in which like we are really honing how we are to other people, right? And that ends up being a part of us, right? So it carries through everything. I think that kind of ethic of like how we want to show up for people, at least for me, that yeah, I agree that does kind of carry across.
Mhm.
I think that one of the divides in persona for me is the intentionality that we've talked about in some different ways throughout this. When I'm a therapist, I'm going to be a little bit thoughtful about is now a helpful or healing time for me to have the big reaction. If the big
Mm,
reaction is within me, I would
mm,
be unlikely to be so intentional and hold it back in a friend situation. But as a therapist, I'm like, you have a responsibility to think, would me making a joke right now, would that land in a helpful way? Or would that maybe distract us from this deeper work that we're trying to get at?
mm.
Um, and there are times when I'll choose like, you know what, this would be a great time for some levity.
Yeah, yeah,
So
I
we're
hear
gonna
you.
be we're gonna be playful and we're gonna have, and there are other times when a client might want to laugh that I might say, I think we're pulling away from some sadness here. And you are hilarious and I want to laugh at your joke, but there's something else going on here.
I think that's right. And I think the difference between like kind of like what we're saying to clients and our personality of how we treat them are two different things. Like
Mm,
the conversations we have with friends or our family or whoever, our partners might be very different from the conversation or what that conversation is going to look like. When a client laughs about something really sad, me not laughing is a therapeutic tool
yeah.
that can allow them to realize, oh, it's safe to go here if you want to. Or sometimes I will laugh at the sad thing if I'm building trust. All of those are tools. It doesn't change my personality. It's what I'm doing with the role, the vocation of what we're doing in this chair. I was gonna say that you know who taught me about being myself in the therapy room? It was
Oh.
teenage clients.
Hmm.
I was working with at-risk youth. And I came in trying to like kind of like, be a professional, be the kind of person that I was doing my training, so I was still figuring out what that inside outside room was. And I learned very quickly that teenagers are so smart, especially if they've had to have street smarts and kind of really assess somebody right away. That me being any kind of professional or having a veneer would actually make that client not trust me. Well, I'm making that sound actually quite nice. They were quite mean about it.
I've not worked with actually like in various roles. I have worked with a lot of youth, and I'm kind of connecting with this. And exactly as you were saying, they're not always nice. I remember one specific situation when a middle school kind of age client was like socks and sandals. I was like, oh, you got me there. And for
This is
me, like
bringing out your dad's side.
exactly, just gotta like roll with it and like, yep, like you got me, like you got me with the Birkenstocks situation, and I apologize.
Apologize?
Not really, but I know I let us laugh at me,
Yes.
right? Because
Yes.
that you're like, right, that is in sincerity, like I am that person sometimes.
Yes. And I think that sincerity was exactly what I learned. If I was sincere or I screwed up or um I just was myself, like I really took away any of that kind of professional persona, that those teenagers would actually get the best work done. And it was beautiful. I realized pretty fast that I just wanted to help, but actually by helping, it was actually just being present. On a Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m., they knew I was consistent and I was going to be there. And I realized that was actually more therapeutic than anything I could say. And I actually kind of took that into my practice as a psychotherapist now with adults. I specialize in trauma. Well, they're also assessing if they're safe with somebody. They also know how to read somebody. So, me putting on that professional veneer now would be completely counterintuitive to how it would be to help somebody. When you've had trauma, you are reading somebody. You usually know where they are, who they are, and how to navigate that. So I think that's been really helpful in kind of taking that away from my person,
Mhm.
allowing my personality to shine through. But it kind of makes me think about who I am and what I bring to therapy. And I'm curious, Ryan, are there any parts of you that you don't bring? Like, are there any, like, we're talking about what we bring and how we're kind of taking off this persona, but is there anything we don't bring to therapy?
For me, I think there are some things that I'm gonna keep out of the room, right?
Mm,
I'm not going to talk probably really ever, if maybe extremely seldom, am I going to talk about my own personal experiences in life.
mm,
I'm not going to talk about my relationships. Um, I'm not going to talk about my political beliefs for the most part. Like there are signals that I will try to send to make it clear that I want to be there for marginalized and oppressed people.
mm,
um, that I'm welcoming, supportive, and a part of the queer community.
mm,
Um, but on the other hand, like necessarily how I vote or what kind of philosophies I have for like the way I live my own life, things that like that I'm a vegan, would only ever come up if a client like brought me a baked good or something. That I'm kind of like a punk rebellious type person, that I've participated in direct actions,
mhm,
that I got a lot more tattoos than a client's gonna see. Like there are things of me that are not in the room. And that
mm.
there because it would make it about me.
Okay.
And could I think for the client bring this element of, oh, Ryan thinks that this is the right thing. And either that means that I disagree and I feel distance from them, or I feel like I should be that, or I feel like I need to convince Ryan to that they should not be like that, etc.
Mm,
So like the things that similarly with appearance, the things that I keep out of the room are intentional to build space for the client to have
mm.
their own experience and to use me and the therapy the way that they need to. Yeah. And with that, though, I think we are really coming up on our time for today.
Mm,
Thank you all for listening to Your Therapist Is Not Okay, and for hearing a little bit about what we have to say about who we are in the therapy room and out of the therapy room.
yeah. I think it's actually a great question. And it's one that's always been on my mind, especially
Mm,
when inevitably we'll see somebody outside of the therapy room. So thinking about we're in a profession that is about relationship, about bringing who we are to the space to help somebody else explore, either through the microcosm that is psychotherapy or also just feel safe. And we do that through bringing ourselves. So, this is a fantastic thing to think about. Who
hmm
are we bringing for that safety? So, thank you. If you have more questions, bring them our way. We love grappling with these really important topics about the therapy room.
Thank you so much to the person who asked this.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, check out our others. And stay tuned for even more episodes coming up.
Follow us and leave a review on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please tell your friends.
You can also follow us on Instagram too at Your Therapist Is Not Okay. Also, if you have any questions that you want us to answer, send us a DM there. We would love to answer your questions. And a lot of our topics come from listeners just like you.